August 21st at 9 a.m. That will be in front of Judge Boyce. It's my understanding that will be held remotely via Zoom, but I will leave that up to Judge Boyce.
All right, so there you have it. Probable cause. The judge lays it out. Now, Laura, we were talking about this during the break, that we think that the judge had a pretty easy job to do. We knew the judge was going to come on decision for political reasons, for factual reasons. I guess the main question now is, and I guess it's just guesswork for either one of us, we understand it's a low hurdle. Do you think that the prosecution far exceeded that hurdle, or came like just enough to get the job done? Because the defense did poke some pretty big holes, not sufficient enough to win the hearing, but he did kind of highlight some pretty good spots.
Agreed. I think the defense came out a lot stronger. The arguments were a lot more convincing. The prosecution barely made it. But again, I've said it again, and I'll say it again. It doesn't take much to satisfy this threshold of probable cause. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. All you need sometimes is a warm body sitting next to you. We say it jokingly, but it's pretty close to the truth. All you need is, sufficient evidence that a crime was committed and that this particular defendant was involved. And I think they had enough, even though, again, it was weak. It wasn't the strongest that I've seen, but clearly enough, as expected, for the judge to hold Chad Daybell to answer.
Yeah. And when we talk about just enough, just to give context to our viewers, I think the easiest thing that you can do, and I usually tell people based on like grades, because everyone went to school at one point in time in whatever grade level. I would think of the preliminary hearing as like getting a D on a test. You passed, right?
Exactly.
You're not the best student in the class, but you're definitely going to the next grade level. If we're talking about beyond a reasonable doubt, like a jury trial, I would say that's more of like a B+, A-. You don't really have to be perfect, but you got to be higher. So when we're talking about just enough, we're not saying the prosecution did a horrible job or when it be. We're just saying, hey, they got, I would say, I don't know, I'll throw a grade out there, Lara. If you want to throw out a grade, you're more than welcome to. I would say this is a D+. I would say it's just enough, but I'm still really surprised at the defense. They had a lot more than I thought. If you were to look at the defense's side and say, okay, I think you had enough to push the envelope, but maybe not enough based on the attention of this case. Do you think that I think you already kind of commented on it, but what evidence do you think the defense really needed to push this preliminary hearing over the top in their favor, if that was even a possibility?
I guess maybe some kind of direct evidence, some kind of evidence that Chad Daybell was not on the property on September 9th. And it would have been great if he was not on some of these phone calls. But I don't think they'll be able to prove that he wasn't on the property on September 9th. Or maybe if evidence comes forth about the date of killing or time of killing and how long ago Tylee was, in fact, murdered. And if it was after September 9th, that might be helpful. I mean, there's all sorts of things that can come forward. But I think probably his best bet to get out of this is to probably testify against his wife or to cut a deal of some sort against his wife.
Yeah. And it's interesting to think about the change of venue concept, because I think a lot of this has to really deal with living on that type of land and having that big of a backyard. Because I know sometimes we talk here at the Law and Crime Trial Network, we have attorneys who are, like myself, practice in Brooklyn or New Jersey or California like you are, and oftentimes in larger cities. Do you think that this is a jury trial where you would have to pick from people from maybe not the same town, but similar settings to understand what Chad might be arguing is like, hey, I got a lot of land. I've got acres upon acres. I don't know everything that happens here, and maybe that's why he's not a part of this conspiracy. Do you think that could kind of feed into his defense in picking the right venue for him?
Why not? It may, because that is a pretty decent argument. We already could see hints of that where defense counsel was asking, or they were talking about how there's neighbors around, and also there was some questioning of Melanie Daybell. I don't know if you remember, where she was asked about her and her boyfriend going along with Chad Daybell to a neighboring property that he was suggesting for them to buy, to purchase, and to construct. And we got into the fact that her boyfriend, David, is a general contractor. The argument that I would make as defense counsel would be, hey, if I know that I bury 2 bodies on my own property, why would I ever ask these people to come and buy a property next door and start building and bring more attention to my property? It could be one of the arguments that they make, and then there's plenty of people around them, and maybe someone could have. There's other neighbors, maybe not too close, even though the argument is huge land, but again, they would be visible to others potentially. And I could see that argument coming in as well. I mean, you could see again where the defense was going with this. And I could see some of the arguments that you're saying that they might bring up already. The seeds are already there. We got a preview of, again, where the arguments are going to be headed, what the defense arguments are going to be.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. Continue.
Basically, I was going to say that, again, as far as grades, I would give the prosecution a D. I wouldn't even give them a D+. And I think the defense did a definitely much better job at poking holes in the story and the witnesses' testimony.
Yeah. Now, let's, so you give them a little bit less of a grade. I could see that, a D instead of a D+. Maybe I was being a little bit too kind. But they got the job done. So we know that, like, for example, they're going to bring in a coroner. They're going to bring in other witnesses to kind of cure some of the hearsay that they might not be able to get away, or they will not be able to get away with at an actual trial. Talk to us about the prosecution's case and how they can get from that D grade to the B+, A-, in which they're going to need to reach for beyond a reasonable doubt. What elements do you think needed to be added to that?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about the conspiracy to conceal or the actual concealment, at this point for a trial, definitely they're going to need more because they've got to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. So then they're going to need possibly testimony from other individuals who may have had contact with these 2 defendants, conversations, other lies, plans. And I'm sure there's plenty of witnesses out there who did not testify during the 2-day trial. But my guess is that they're not really going to be satisfied with just these charges. This is going to go to a different level. We know that this is headed towards murder charges. And for murder charges, I expect clearly a lot more evidence than what we've got, because they can't get Chad Daybell for murder charges just because the bodies were buried there. I mean, you could establish reasonable doubt by just saying, he was probably asleep during that time. Anyone could have been on the property. We were just arguing that just a minute ago. Anyone could be on this property, especially someone like Lori's, his wife's brother, doing whatever it is that he was doing, hiding the bodies there, and he would have never known. So there's got to be more. There's got to be some kind of forensic evidence, maybe some DNA evidence, whether it be on the kids were bound on the bag somewhere. There's got to be something that he's left behind if he was truly involved physically. So I would say some forensic evidence would be great to tie him into it if we want a conviction here of Chad Daybell. I really think that they barely got over that threshold as far as the prosecution is concerned, and I would expect to see a lot more. I'm sure once the coroner comes back, we'll find out exactly what the cause of death is. There's a lot missing here. We all know it. I mean, we barely have scratched the surface, if that. So I'm expecting evidence that could support, at this point, murder charges, and that would come into play with a long line of witnesses, including experts and coroners and officers and detectives and witnesses that they've talked to and places that they've been to and what they've done and how they were behaving. You name it. It's going to be a long, long case.
Yeah.
We're not close to that.
So the prosecution is basically, to use a baseball analogy, they basically got on first base. And so what we're going to see throughout the pendency of this case, and especially when they get to trial, is how are they going to bring it home? Like Lara was saying, they're going to bring in more evidence, they're going to bring in more testimony, and they're going to probably try to lock them down on a murder charge. And that's them bringing this case to home base. But they've done just enough to get by at this stage. We're going to take a quick break, come back with more, recapping the Chad Daybell preliminary hearing, and giving you that expert analysis that you always get from Long Crime Trial Network right after this break.